So Nishmita, you will introduce and then you will hand over to me and then I'll hand over to Seema.
Sure. We'll start in a minute.
Yeah, it is 6:29. Let's just wait for 6:30 and just see the audience and then we'll start. Once it hits about. All set, yeah. Yeah, Nishmita.
Hello, everyone. It's really great to have you with us today. We're going to be discussing a very interesting and relevant topic, that's humanity's gender gap today. I'm really excited to see what comes out of this conversation. I see that a lot of you are using the chat to introduce yourselves and telling us where you're from. I invite everyone to do the same. Please remember that towards the end of the conversation, we are going to continue this at the forum. I'll post the link in the chat box towards the end, and don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel. Over to you, Ram.
Yeah, hi. Good evening to all of you. Good day to you who are from other parts of the world, the US, Canada, parts of Europe. Good day. So yeah, we are in the last week. Yesterday we had a session, the first session of the week, and today is the second session, 3 more sessions coming this week. And as always, please address all panelists and attendees together. Nishmita will be posting you the forum link for you to put on questions, and we would later be sharing them with the panel members for them to come and visit and answer questions if necessary. And also we'll be sharing the YouTube videos as soon as possible, as also with the panelists. Yeah, as Nishmita said, this subject is extremely dear to our heart about the gender gap. Well, it's a much larger gap. It's a gap between the power and the powerless, the privileged and unprivileged, and gender gap is one of them. And as you see here, there are 3 people from the panel. There will be 1 more likely to join. So they would be conducting the dialogue, multi-log amongst them. I'll just introduce first Seema. She's going to coordinate amongst the panel and ask her to come in. Some of you have all the time, the last few minutes, about 3 minutes or so, we would just come in once you finish, sum it up, and Nishmita will close the session. Thank you very much for being here today. Leave it to you to explain the theme and introduce the panel and yourself. Thank you.
Thank you, Ram, and welcome everyone. Do I say good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and some of you might still need to be in bed. And of course, some of you would have also met with Janet Harvey from last week and clearly know that Converge 2019 has not had a ginormous impact on her, and she looks like this. Janet was due to host the panel discussion today and is actually embroiled in conversation in Brussels that she just simply couldn't step out of. So today I'll host, I'll mediate, and I'll give you a moment as well to connect with Dorothy and Diane, and if Sylvia joins us too, other ICF panelists in this discussion. As Nish said, this is around humanity's gender confidence gap. Our opportunity and our intent for this panel discussion is to have a dialogue. I love that word, Ram, that you just said, a multi-log, to evoke more understanding around what does that mean for us in the context of humanity's confidence gap. What are we doing? What's happening? And what are the conditions that we create, consciously or unconsciously, in the bias of how we generate that gap that defines us, that connects us, and much more often that disconnects us. This is not an intention for us to be speaking about confidence itself. This is not going to be a conversation about how we build confidence and how do we learn as coaches to coach our clients around the concept of confidence, that is another conversation, and plenty enough dialogue, I'm certain, can be based around that. In this conversation, we want to explore with you, what is this perpetual sense that there is a confidence gap among gender, amongst us as humans? And it's not just unique to women. It's very much part of our society. It exists in every walk of life. Some people naturally tend to exude confidence. There's also some folk who perhaps naturally don't tend to. When confidence is not authentic, when it's not who we are, and we label it as something else, we find ourselves using really unflattering words, aggressive, a bully, unapproachable. Yet when confidence is shared, expressed with complete authenticity, with deep connection in wanting to be able to connect with the other person, there's a real balance, a real ability to be able to hear and see the other people in which you connect with. That's a sort of heart-centered connection that we can have as human beings, and there's power in that. And that's the conversation that I want for us to evoke. I want for us to please, with my panel today, discuss. Before I get going, let me just introduce my panel. I'm sorry, I'm slightly distracted because it's autumn in Oxford, which is where I'm based, and there are squirrels in the garden trying to dig up the plant pots that I planted for the autumn to berry nuts. So there we go. Let me introduce Dorothy and Deanne. Dorothy, will you say a little bit about yourself and just introduce yourself based where you are?
I want to just say hello to everybody on the line. Welcome. It's very exciting to be here. I'm a Canadian coach based in Toronto, working in Istanbul. Thank you. Oh, you want us to say a little bit about ourselves? Yeah. So one of the things that I just want to offer is that in my work as a coach, I have adopted the perspective of the Native American Indian of North America. And in their wisdom, they hold this belief that everyone carries their original medicine, and it's their job to understand what their medicine is so they can offer it to the world that needs their medicine. And I think that that's such a valuable perspective to hold, that each person has something to contribute that is an evolutionary act. And our work as coaches is to partner with our clients to support them in owning their own original medicine, their gifts, and then being awake to what is wanted, needed, or missing in their lives. And it's a real privilege to understand that in many ways, genius is self-bestowed and mediocrity is maybe self-inflicted. And so our job is to help people understand their gifts and what they can offer others. And in this conversation on the gender gap, well, I want to just really own that I come from the world of organizational development by way of becoming an executive coach and life coach. And I really have been in this conversation of gender inequity, but really the underprivileged all over the world. And one of my beliefs is that it's a position from deep democracy, is that the minority perspective always holds the greatest power of what evolution needs to move forward. And so it's really supporting the voice that needs to be heard, whether it's our own self-oppression or it's the groups that don't feel included enough or recognized enough to speak. And I just want to say that there is a correction going on in the world, which we see to some leadership like Jacinda Ardern in New Zealand, where after an act of tremendous violence, 51 people were killed in 2 different mosques in New Zealand, she steps forward to offer the kind of healing that the world really needs to see more of in leadership. It came from a female leader. You look at someone like Christine Lagarde in the International Monetary Fund, stepping forward to bring a form of moral leadership that the world really needed to see. Or recently, we see someone like Greta Thunberg speaking a message to the world about how to really be responsible to change at the age of 16, Or years ago, this young 15-year-old girl, Malala, who was shot in the head and comes back to speak to the United Nations in the strong, confident belief that girls deserve the right to read and be educated. Those are the kind of voices I think the world needs to be supported in, hearing more of, and they are in women, but they are in many different groups of people who are not speaking for themselves. And as coaches, we stand to really support their voices coming forward. Thank you.
Well said, Dorothy.
Merci.
Very, very inspiring message. My name is Diane Bonneau. I'm originally from Montreal, so you'll hear a bit of a French accent in the background. So English is my second language. I live in Calgary, Alberta, in Canada. And I want to say hello to everyone. It's a pleasure to be here this morning. I want to share a little bit what inspired me to participate in this conversation. About a year ago, I started working with a coach who is a PhD student, and she's working on her thesis currently. And we've had conversations over the past year about her thesis topic. Essentially, our coaching is always about the thesis topic, and the topic is about coach as authority. So we have woven in and out of that topic from every possible angle, and there's still more to explore. And when you talk about authority, you're talking about confidence, power, how you show your authority as a coach, what we allow our client, how we allow our clients to demonstrate their authority in the coaching relationship, and how we show up as a person. And there's no end to the dialogue because it weaves through our experiences with our families, our partners, our clients, and even in what we see in the news with politicians. There's always this show of authority and power, and confidence actually exists on the spectrum. So, you know, we see the way that we express confidence and personal authority, it often stems from our early childhood, and it's acted out in our everyday life. And it's often, we don't even really realize what's motivating our behaviors or things that we say. It's not necessarily conscious. So I was brought up, as many of you, in what we call in our social system patriarchy. My dad was the king in the house, and men often still do hold the primary power. And they predominate in roles of political leadership, moral authority, social privilege, control of property, and in some countries, you know, more or less. The result of our old way of thinking and behaving is showing up right now. We're seeing things around climate change, around the crisis with refugees, with extreme weather events, with country leaders with extreme views. And I'm not exonerating women in this because we have raised the men and women that live in our world today. And you know, as I was reflecting on this topic, I want us to keep in mind that up until recently, we were quite blind to the impact of our consumer society, how we use the land. Coming out of the Second World War, life was one big celebration. It was a party. We could be who we wanted to be. We could purchase all kinds of things. And we are now finding out that that was at a cost. And now we have to ask ourselves the question, what do we need to change? Because we are in crisis on multiple levels. So there needs to be a dramatic change in our society, in our economic system, and organizations are still focused on growth year after year versus sustainability and how we take care of the planet, of the humans, and it starts with each one of us. And I believe we're going to have that conversation today.
Thank you, Dorothy. And a little bit about me. My most earliest memory or recollection of there being inequality or something was different when we were around, I was around 5-6 years old amongst my brother and our cousins. I was the only female, in amongst 4 or 5 males. And at that age, just out ravaging, playing together. Here's what I noticed as a distinction. When one of us, and if you put 6 or 7 little people together, 1 or 2 of them are going to get naughty. Here's the moment I realized the distinction. When we had been naughty, my brother and cousins were beaten by our parents, and I was set aside. And to me, that just didn't feel right. There was something very uncomfortable around what was possible. Being almost the oldest in that room, I'd ask my parents and my aunts, uncles, what if you were just to beat me and I could take it for all of them? They kind of just laughed it off and told me to just shush and run off to the kitchen. For me now, let's track forward a few years, more than a few years. Coaching and societal progress are intrinsically linked. We have within us the absolute purpose to be able to connect and build the potential of what each individual has, that they can be shown, they can be seen, fully heard in their most authentic self. I hold a vision that for society, for humanity, what would be possible if we could create safe, loving, open spaces for us all to be able to just connect and belong with each other and hold the possibility of what becomes possible. You've mentioned already in these introductions some mindful leaders. What becomes possible in this equitable life that we could lead if we had conversations from a place of loving and belonging, rather than restricting or defining us to our roles, to our gender, to our sexual orientation. So, a little bit about our introduction. All of us, as you know, are ICF credential master certified coaches. The opportunity of today is, let's stand for the possibility of what becomes possible in a disrupted world if we engaged in a conversation that genuinely felt like we were listened to, heard. We closed down that gap, humanity's gap, confidence gap. The way we'd like to structure the conversation is we'll run through a couple of questions, maybe 3 or 4 questions that myself, Deanne, and Dorothy will respond to. And we'll open up the dialogue. Ram, please feel free to chip in and out of this dialogue as and when. And we'll take questions. I might weave them in and out as and when they arrive, or we'll definitely leave a sacred space towards the end of this conversation for your questions. Let me just pose the first question. I think I might take this first question myself. As moderator, I'm going to take responses to the questions and answer questions too. So the first question, as we were discussing, planning, talking around this, was what is the big picture viewpoint on confidence that goes beyond identity, role, and gender? So that was the question. What is the big picture viewpoint on confidence that goes beyond identity, role, and gender? So for me, some people just seem to exude confidence. There's just a sense of presence, sense of being that is completely authentic, charismatic themselves. Sometimes, of course, when it isn't authentic, it isn't with presence, it can be labeled as being unflattering, and we define it in other ways. Perhaps it's perceived as being bullying. Perhaps it's perceived as being arrogant, aggressive, unapproachable. Yeah, when confidence is expressed as a balance, the power of your identity in that heartfelt place when we generate with others around us strong relationships. The Prime Minister of New Zealand created that, as Dorothy was describing. She was able to unify a whole country and a whole nation or a whole group of people who belong to a way of following. Confidence stimulates mutual responsibility. It stimulates partnership, respect, and openness to listening. If we start to create habits where if we identify ourselves as mother, father, brother, sister, we define ourselves in such roles, it means that we then create places for how we gender upbringing. We condition through humanity's conventions an unconscious way of how we know who our children are going to be and how they are. Who can I beat and who I can't beat? What perpetuates this gap? What creates it? I know we're talking about humanity's gap, but in the past, it has always seemed to be that women have felt the least confident in society. In the past, women have felt as if they were the ones who perhaps didn't have the opportunities that men had. What we're learning and what we're hearing from many of the... Welcome, Sylvia.
Sorry, I couldn't join you as a panelist. My apologies. I was listening to you, but couldn't join as a panelist.
It's just wonderful to see you. You made it. You made it.
Apologies to everybody.
No apology. You're here now. You're here now.
Saima, I'd like to offer that Sylvia found her power and is here.
She did. And I'd like to offer my authentic way of saying, I've lost my thread of what I was about to say. Let's take that moment, and I'm completely comfortable in being lost. As Sylvia, you take just a moment of breathing and say a little bit about you. Introduce where you're from, where you're sitting right now, and what brings you to this panel discussion.
So, my love to everybody. I'm speaking from Rome, Italy. I am one of the MCC on this call, and thank you for the invitation, because it's really a pleasure to be able to have such a wider audience and be so really global. You know, given we have so many countries present. And the subject of today is really dear to me, because really looking at, you know, how to fulfill people's potential and people's dream is at the heart of the choices that are made personally and professionally. And in particularly coaching, I think, has a great power to allow people to, you know, rediscover themselves, rediscover what's really important, and therefore also looking at their confidence and their ability to really take the dreams out of the closet and make them happen. So I hope today will make a contribution to that.
Thank you, Sylvia. And I'm grateful for your contribution, grateful for your contribution. I think this is where I was heading to. Image is not confidence. My labels and my roles is not my confidence. My confidence is where I hold true core sense of who I am and how I want to be able to connect, create space for a meaningful conversation with others around me. I keep this very parochial within myself. I know we're wanting to have a much wider global conversation. But for me, if we're not able to be able to share with one another a sense of what is it that I want to be able to create to make a difference, I don't give you the space, I don't give you the time to be able to hear that authentically for yourself, we'll never be able to demonstrate the active learning and listening for how do we as humanity come together and make the difference. So this steps way beyond our role, this steps way beyond our gender. This is about humanity's progression through this world that we find ourselves in right now. Let's move into the second question. Sylvia, you're hot on the seat here.
Yes, I am.
Let me read the question out. Let's give ourselves some space so people can just take a moment. We can all just digest it. What perpetuates the perception of a confidence gap, especially for women?
Yes, I think this is a big question that you know, I think men and women is relevant for both genders. And, you know, I was thinking today about role models in order, you know, to look at this confidence gap. And someone that really struck me at very inspiring is Eleanor Roosevelt, who was the first lady in the US, wife of Franklin Roosevelt in the 1993, 1945. But then moved on to be one of the founders really of the UN and of the human rights and the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And she says something which is, I think, is really relevant. No one can make you feel inferior without your consent. Because you know, the confidence gap, some researchers say, you know, demonstrate that really there's no gap in origin, but the gap is then really developed because, you know, there are some differences in people, how women are treated, there's some stereotypes, there's some, you know, not good role models, there's some obstacles that are outside of women that, you know, then really undermine their original confidence that women might have. And also set the example for, you know, behaviors that and practices and maybe some, again, difficulties and challenges that women can find. So really, I think this perception really starts from inside. So there's a lot of work to be done on awareness of my strengths, my talents, my rights also. And then there's an outer dimension, which of course is more complex, which is linked to culture, to norms, to education, also to laws. So, and the task to look at, you know, what keeps the gap. Let's just make it easier for me. What keeps the gap in existence? You know, some work can be done inside. So on my mindset, on how I express myself, how, you know, I communicate, what choices I make, but also there's a lot of work to be done outside of the individuals, which is more complex, has to be on a systemic approach, and has to involve, again, institutions, families, and education. So, yeah, that's a first answer to this question.
Diane and Dorothy, can I invite you to respond in some way? And Sylvia as well, please just take some moments just to refer back to my original question that I took, and as well as yours. What comments or thoughts have you got that you'd like to add?
I feel this is an interesting question because we talk here about what perpetuates the perception of a confidence gap. And is it only a perception is the question that comes to my mind. Is it only a perception, or is it a fact of what perpetuates the confidence gap? I suspect there are, well, I more than suspect, my experience is that the context in which we live generates the confidence gap. So we live in an environment, and I'm looking at North America, you know, I'm discovering that I have a lot of different biases around other countries where I make assumptions that are not true, because I was interviewing somebody from China yesterday and they said, no, it's not like that over here. And I thought, okay, what's the biases I have? So I'm going to talk about North America. I feel that, you know, women who work in organizations, for example, don't get paid the same salary as men for the same job. And that's actually a fact. It's demonstrated. We're getting closer, but that's still a gap that exists. we're dealing now with, you know, a much larger awareness of the LGBTQ society and what they're dealing with, and us having to be so much more, we have to have it come to these situations with an open heart and so much more acceptance and being more conscious of what's happening in the world and what's happening around us. It's not just about being ourselves, being who we are. We have to encompass all of the world because there's such diversity everywhere now. Those are my initial thoughts.
I want to support that, Diane, and maybe just to offer Sylvia the wisdom of, you know, we cannot feel inferior without some form of consent. It's such a provocative statement because in so many ways, when any of us feel underprivileged or not invited, we don't even know that we have consented to staying in the silent majority and to not being included, not being at the table where choice and power really lives. And so I say to you that one of the questions is we need to really invite those that we coach is, are you aware? What is it that you may not have been aware of is one of the most basic questions that we offer. But in particular to those people of the demographics that Diane just offered us, that don't know that they're living in the population of the underprivileged. You know, a philosophy from deep democracy work that's now being done in the work is that the energy of creativity lies in the minority, that the minority has a kind of power and creativity that we need to hear from, but we have to invite them. And so sometimes, not just at the individual level, but what are the cultural factors that collude with keeping people silent? And that sometimes when we just address things at the individual level, we also make people feel shameful that they were silent when in fact they were not part of the invitation. So I really welcome us looking at the individual level and remembering sometimes it's the larger systems that acts to keep our voices quiet. And we as coaches can take an individual perspective, but a larger system perspective that helps people know what are the choices to be aware of. Thank you.
I'm just flicking through the chat as we're all speaking and noticing that you're contributing in ways of, it's a way of being, it's an inner sense, it's a faith that you follow. And there's some wonderful, powerful comments that you're making. And I'm drawn to Vijaya Kumar. I think you're describing, is confidence gap only with women? And the next question you're asking is, are we all not confident in some contexts? I'm going to say yes, no, yes. Let's answer that. Is confidence gap only with women? No, not at all. We experience that in the playground. We experience it in the work context, in and around our co-workers. We are sometimes constrained because we're different. Our diversity is different. The ways in which we contribute, the ways in which we think. And because of that, our confidence means that we retract and become constrained. We've experienced and worked with people in our environments, in teams who do that. So it's not just associated with women. I think this is a systemic, humane confidence around how we're choosing to be. It could also be within the LGBTQ plus community. It could just be within trans communities. How are we generating an openness for people to feel connected so that their voices are heard? Are we not all confident in some contexts? Yes. Would a powerful world be possible if we were powerful in all contexts, all of the time, to bring our whole self to all of the conversations that this world needs right now? I'm hearing lots of hello from lots of beautiful places. Now, let's just hear, there's a question from Ahmed. He says, hello, my question is, what do you mean by large awareness? And what do you mean by large awarenesses? Would one of you like to take that question while I manage the chat?
Absolutely. I think I mentioned that. I think that
Yes.
one of the things is, you know, awareness, first of all, is so core to the learning process and to the change process. And by that, I really mean, do we see when there's an opportunity to respond to something, whether people need to be answered, where people have not feel included, where people haven't been invited? Are we even aware of those moments so that we can invite, we can ask, we can recognize? That is what's called awareness. Are we aware at the individual level of those moments? Are we aware even in this moment, Saima, when you say, someone asks the question, is it lack of confidence just for women? Not at all. Lack of confidence comes when any group feels underprivileged, not recognized, and not given the kind of awareness at a larger level to be at the table or invited. And this is where this larger awareness comes from, more of a sociological scan of who is not speaking, what group is not being recognized. So when Diane really mentions, you know, the LGBTQ community, or in Canada, the First Nation community, or in America, the Native American Indians, who, by the way, were not recognized for only 200 years. Now their wisdom is being recognized, and I would say, thank God. Or any group in the world that is not being responded to, or they're not being heard. That's called a larger awareness that is so easy for people not to be aware of. I would invite another response, Saima, Sylvia.
Yes, and if I can add, I think this is how you really create movements. I mean, we mentioned Greta, for instance, before, Thunberg. It really takes courage and awareness to start, you know, shifting awareness, a general awareness, not just yours, but it has to start with yourself. So again, it's from personal, so from individual to outside. And I think that, you know, in that sense, the new social media can be so powerful, you know, looking at the positive side of them, because you can really spread awareness much faster than before. Positive awareness. You can also, you know, raise negative, but let's look at the positive use of social media, because for really changing this situation of confidence, general confidence, as some of you pointed out, not just gender, of you know, women's confidence. We need to have more confidence ourselves and share it and join forces in stopping, you know, when people's rights or talents or lives are not respected. So I think confidence is really critical. It's a critical thing to develop from very early on, and really educated people that can trust themselves and, you know, believe in themselves and, you know, follow their own path in the respect of other people's, of course.
Thank you, Sylvia. I'm noticing as the chat's moving along, Elaine has a question. In conversation using gender-neutral pronouns in our various languages, so not to offend in our selections of binary gender words. What are our thoughts? What are our comments to that? Gracelia, please pardon me, my dear, if I've pronounced that wrong. You know, do we as society link confidence with privilege? Yes, I think we do. I think we create bias in all the ways that we choose and believe that we are elite, superior. And the moment humanity creates distinctions amongst who we are, that bias then creates the gap, takes us further away from who we can be when we're working together. Let's move into the third question that I have, and I wanted to invite Diane, if you'd like to take this question, and then we'll come back to some more of your questions in the chat room too.
Sure.
Thank you all for your contributions.
Sana, can I just point to something that's in the chat room right now? Someone was asking about the gender neutral pronouns. And I just want to address that, because we're going to be talking in terms of he and she and male and female a lot during this conversation. And, you know, as much as it's in our consciousness now to be aware of gender neutral pronouns, there's such a learning curve to learn to use those pronouns. I just became made aware of that maybe a month or 2 months ago, and I started reading articles about it, and I'm really making an effort to use that, but it's just not automatic. We're so used to speaking in terms of he and she that there's a learning curve to this. So just want to put that out there.
Thank you, Diane. Thank you. We're all making these adjustments. So here's your question. What are ways to empower confidence that will transcend societal bias associated with identity, role, and gender?
I don't have the same question as you, Sayma, it looks like.
Am I reading?
The question that I have, and maybe I didn't hear you properly, is what blocks a person from living?
Let's switch over. Let's ask you this question, Diane. What blocks a person, and my apologies, what blocks a person from living into the natural confidence? Does that sound a little more familiar to you?
That sounds more familiar, yes.
You can tell we've planned for this. What blocks a person from living into the natural confidence of their authentic self, regardless of context and situation?
Yeah, that is such a big question. I'm just going to read it again. I'm just going to say it out loud again. So what blocks a person from living into the natural confidence of their authentic self, regardless of context and situation? Wow, can we even ignore context and situation when we ask a question like this? I'm not sure that we can. You know, in our societies, depending on the country that we live in, there are spoken and unspoken rules. Rules that encourage certain behaviors where we get rewarded and approved of, and behaviors that are shunned, that we consider undesirable behaviors, where we withhold love or approval or punish even. I think somebody needs to go on mute there. If I think about living into the natural confidence of our authentic self, it's regardless of context and situation. I'll address that one first. I think it's about getting in touch with who we are at our essence. And that it's about being internally validated. So we live in a society where we, you know, I think that's our starting point as socialized human beings, is that we look at being validated from the outside. Whatever is rewarded is the behavior that we have. Whatever the values or the behaviors adopted by our tribe, those are the behaviors that we have. And as we move in terms of adult stages of development into a self-authored stage, we get in touch with what our values are, what our needs are, who we want to be in the world, what our life purpose is. And once we get in touch with that, our life purpose becomes bigger than who we are. So we step out of, how do I need to be perceived by the outside world to be accepted or approved of, or to feel safe in my environment? It becomes about my purpose and my voice and my song. The reason why I'm alive is more important than anything else. And when that's more important than anything else, my discomfort is not important. I know I look at myself, and I've been an MCC coach for so many years. And there are some times where I think to myself, like, who am I? And do I even deserve to have this designation, or what's so special about me, or is my message important? And when I get in touch with my life purpose and what I feel I'm here to accomplish and how I want to serve, all that falls away because that's not important. So it's learning to walk hand in hand with our fears versus letting our fears run the show. And when I work with leaders in organizations, I've worked with presidents in large oil and gas companies. I know it's not a popular topic right now, oil and gas, but who say to me, I go to these networking events where the premier is there and whatnot. And I think, what am I doing here? What do they want from me? And then they realize that they have a bigger purpose and they step into that. I don't think anybody's exempt from a lack of self-confidence from time to time, that we all have to step into that space, yeah, that's where my thinking goes with that question. If we want to talk about context and situation, I could add a lot more.
I'd like to join with Dan. There's a question here which I think is very relevant. How authentic self-confidence could be related to vulnerability, which, it's really joins with your looking at your purpose and your, why we're here. So I think vulnerability is often considered a weakness, especially at work, at least in Western Europe. And also showing emotions is often considered as, again, a sign of weakness. And it's more often, again, women that are showing that emotions than men. And I think this is one of the places we need to go back in rebuilding confidence, because unless a single person is aware of his own emotions, feelings, beliefs, values, it's very difficult to then build confidence and be able to then show that confidence in the world. So I think emotional intelligence, as I also call the ability to understand your own feeling, needs, how you experience yourself, and how you react to external situation, is very critical to building confidence. So it's not one or the other, but it's the core of confidence.
I'd like to follow you, Sylvia, if I may. This is Dorothy. I think that we need synonyms for the word confidence. One of the synonyms is deep knowing. And in terms of deep knowing, I think, as I listen to you, Diane, very often when we don't really feel confident in ourselves, one of the questions is, what do we really know? And sometimes an evolutionary step forward is, we know when we are in pain. We know when things are not fair. We know when our values have been disrespected or not honored. And from that knowing, there is a corrective that comes about new possibilities. There's a very old book that was written many years ago called Pedagogy of the Oppressed, of social groups that have been oppressed and not given a voice. And I'd like to offer that sometimes we have self-oppression when we don't even know that our pain, our vulnerability is powerful in itself to be voiced. I think of the movements that have come from the LGBTQ movements have been the voice that says we are human beings and we deserve to be listened to. The voice of women all over the world that say we raise the young, we give birth to the young, and our perspective is vital. It's time for us to be heard. The perspective now of men. I hear men in America, especially white men, that say, wait a minute, I didn't do all these terrible things. Can I be heard in my pain? And the answer is yes. We give the invitation as coaches to tell us what does not feel, not tell us, tell yourself Voice what is disturbing you. Voice what is your value. Honor that part of yourself that needs to be heard. And that's an evolutionary step forward when it can be shared. I think also that's that place of vulnerability. So often, you know, there was a great quote from a Secretary of State, I'm blocking on her name now, that says so often women sit at the table and don't say anything. The women sit at the boardrooms or at the leadership groups and don't say anything. And a man will say something and it will be brilliant. And the woman will say to herself, why didn't I say that? I was thinking that, because we don't give ourselves permission. And so one of the questions that I would ask is, how do we give ourselves permission? What do we need, as you say, Sylvia, to allow that voice of vulnerability? Because it's scary to step forward. We could be wrong. We could be rejected. And again, you know, another part of me says, so what? You know, that's where we need what we call the practices to learn how to be resilient, even if we are rejected. I don't know how many times when I'm interviewing leaders, they will say, rejection? How many times? How many times did I get up and say the message again until people started hearing me? And I think that's where confidence comes, from that deep knowing that I have something to say, that my voice matters, that this pain that I have, probably, even if one other person in the world has it, I should speak it. Thank you.
Thank you, Dorothy. Ram, I'm noticing you really listening intently. What thoughts have you got? What are you noticing?
Yeah, I did want to say something. I think there's a lot on the chat. This is an extremely complex subject. I think there are as many views as there are billions of people in this world, or at least half and half, or whatever it might be. People say things have improved. Surely they have in the last 50 years. I don't know how many of you have read Professor David Hawkins, and he talked about levels of consciousness. And he said in the 70s, suddenly there was a shift. For the first time, the human spirit moved into a space of awareness, the large awareness that some of you referred to. You started really looking at beyond the diversities, beyond parochialism and so on and so forth. And according to him, it's an irreversible process. I really hope so. Otherwise, this world is going to be dystopian rather than utopian. Unfortunately, every single scripture or cultural paradigm that has been pronounced in this universe, in this earth so far by anybody, is male-centric. Nobody can deny that. In any religion, I think people need to accept that. Saying, no, that's not true. I don't know, we are all equal. There are large swaths of that population in this world today where the woman is inferior, treated as inferior. Come on, let's accept that. I think if we are men enough, we should be able to accept that. We should have the vulnerability and the courage to be able to say that out loud. Now the question is, what are we going to do about it? I mean, each one has our own solutions. Denial is not an answer, nor the other states of Kubler-Ross's anger and bargaining and all those. And ultimately, we need to come to an integration of this polarity of what we call diversity. And Janet was saying the other day in her conversation, we should talk more about inclusion rather than diversity. And we can keep talking about diversity, it's always there. What is that polarity bridge that needs to happen? In my own experience as a coach, I found that Vijay and a few others have referred to that. The internal validation is a very, very good starting point. Somehow, I think one of you, Dorothy, I think you said about, do we give ourselves a permission? Man or woman, fine, sure. But I find it more and more in women that they deny themselves the permission simply because they are far too emotionally sensitive. Men are not, period. And therefore, you tend to look at somebody else's feelings before you put out your own feelings. And people take advantage of it. Now, I don't think the answer is to become insensitive, but how do you go beyond that to be able to do it? So this is what I work with. Unfortunately, the numbers of women leaders is still I do it globally. I work with many, many people, including startup entrepreneurs and so on, who are women. The numbers are still smaller than men, and I'm hoping someday it's going to go beyond that of men. So my request to you is, I'll stop here. My request to you is, if each of you can share, and I'm sure as master coaches, you have had such tremendous experience in terms of working with women and men. And so what is it that you see? What is it that you have used as coaches to be able to validate them, to boost their confidence? And I think that will be tremendously helpful to the coaches out here, because they're really looking at it from not in the large existential philosophical point of view, but from a very specific coach point of view in terms of, hey, how do we reach this outcome? Okay, I'll stop here. Thank you.
Thank you, Ram. And I'm catching the chat, and here's what I noticed. George Armstrong's describing is that people need to give themselves permission. Actually, what I read and what I hear for myself, George, as you've described that, is, where is the trust within ourselves? How do we trust within ourselves to be able to take responsibility and accountability to call it as we see it, to step into generating a greater impact on what can be a more inclusive, as Janet's describing, a more open and engaging dialogue that we can have with each other. Not a dialogue that defines who we are and what we're capable of doing because of where I was born, how much money I had when my parents were in the process of, producing me. I think we want to be able to create an openness of trust, and that only comes if we're present to ourselves first and foremost.
This is Deanne. There was something in the chat a little earlier about a comment I made about life purpose and getting in touch with our values and what's important to us in our life. And there was a comment, I can't remember the name, and I think it's a little higher up on the chat now in terms of who wrote it, but that it was a privilege to be able to think about this and to have those kinds of conversations and to do that kind of work, that people who are worried about putting food on the table, that they don't have that kind of time and space or concern. And I totally recognize that. I completely recognize that. You know, in terms of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, when you're looking at putting food on the table, getting a roof over your head, feeding your family, you're not thinking about your life purpose and how can I demonstrate more confidence in having these philosophical conversations like Ram was saying earlier. So I completely recognize that. I'm not sure that that's the population we're talking to right now. We're talking about the people that we coach. And once again, those are not the people who are being coached. So, and it's not because I want to exclude them at all. I just realize that is a reality in many parts of the world. So I just wanted to acknowledge that.
Thank you, Diane.
Mm-hmm.
Dorothy, can we step into the question I was originally asking Deanne and ask you instead?
And
Here's
that
the question. What are the ways to empower confidence that will transcend societal bias associated with identity, role, and gender?
So just as we do that as a way of moving forward, I just want to tell you, Deanne, that you just got just from Monique and Ruta, just in real agreement with your comments. So it just as we're building on where we are now. And I'd like to just say to everybody in relation to what will validate people or empower confidence to transcend bias. I think that this word inclusion that was just mentioned by Ram is really an important first step. How do we include ourselves? How do we engage ourselves? And how can we really support our clients and those that are not self-liberating to get engaged? And so, and to do that, I would like to offer a little graph that I've been working with. Let's see if this share comes up. Let's see, this is what it is. I don't know if this is going to show. I apologize for my techno limitations, but I don't know if anyone can see this graph. Can anyone just say to me that they see the presence and masterful use of self graph?
Yeah, we can see that, but if you can sort of enlarge it as what you call a slideshow or something, then
I would like to, but it's not working. It was just sent to me
okay.
by everyone. Just forgive me. I'm vulnerable enough to say I'm limited in this respect, and severely, by the way. I was just trying to play with this. I don't want to keep explaining how severely limited I am. I think it speaks for itself. But this is, I'd like to just say to everybody that in many ways, you know, at the individual level, we are all, you know, there was a great, many years ago, J. Elliott Gould, who wrote a wonderful book called Mismeasure of Man, said that if only 42 people were alive in the world, all the genetic pool of humanity would be captured. I'd like to really say that everyone's challenge is, how do we use our presence? And I'd like to offer that one of the things about using our presence, so we could be either more confident, use our knowing. When we can use our presence, we then can become more choiceful in what I call a masterful use of self. And in order for us to be really being more confident, I would like to offer on the left side, we see the conditions of the world. The change is always happening. You know, in some ways there are our orderly world. I don't think there was ever an order, by the way. I come from a world where my parents were both Holocaust survivors. I did not know what normal was growing up, so I don't believe in normal. But I don't know if anybody really has a normal life. So this issue of regular, orderly change, I question that. But I think we're living in either a disruptive world, an ambiguous world, a volatile world, or very often, very uncertain world. And so if the conditions of the world are context, really asks us on our own individual level, how do I use my presence? And when we talk about presence, we're really talking about, as I think Ram just mentioned, our state of consciousness about ourselves. Who am I? How do I look at the world? That's our resource. Our resource is who am I? But our way that we respond to the world is what I call our use of self. And I know that a week ago, many people had the chance to listen to wonderful Pam McLean, who wrote this book on use of self as coach and use of self as leader. And use of self is a very important term because it requires that we are able to use the dimensions of our presence in response to what we see as something that is wanted either by ourselves or others, that is needed, or it is missing. So often, you know, when Sylvia says the word vulnerability, absolutely, but knowing how to respond and use our vulnerability, knowing how to mention it, knowing how to even say what is needed, it takes skill in use of self to be able to name that. And so one of the intersection points is to recognize that in order for us to become more confident, I think we have to be able, as coaches, to support people to play at the game of life. And if you're playing at the game of life, no matter where you are, as a CEO, as a person in a beginning new job, one of the tasks that we have to learn from is learning from failure. We fail in something. It could be very small. We asked for something, people said no. We gave a presentation, didn't go as we wanted. Learning from failure is about getting, and here's where I think the important part is, that doesn't get mentioned enough, and that is, what are the practices to support being centered in our presence and in our skills in using our presence, our use of self. And when it comes to practices, the practices that we need, all of us, and this is where I'd like to respond, Ram, to that question. One of the things that I really think that we need to learn and support to people is to be able to say to our clients, what did you learn from failure? What were the lessons? How did you learn to calm down after you failed something? How did you learn when something didn't really work for you? What was the lesson embedded in the failure? And here's the reason why it's important. When we learn from failure, we get stronger for the moments of mastery. And in many ways, no matter what our work is, each one of us is looking for the elements of mastery in our life. And mastery requires the practices of, self-validation, learning to listen to the inner chatter of our minds. What are the words that we say to ourselves? I think it's Henry Ford has this famous maxim that says, whatever you tell yourself that you can do or you can't do, you're both right. What is our internal messages? Are we aware of when we're giving ourselves permission or we're giving ourselves self-oppression? What are our practice to learn from? Do we have a support system who can give us strong, clear feedback about how they see us in our mastery? So often people don't get another perspective, and being able to take a perspective from other people assists us in developing stronger use of self skills that are able to respond to the conditions of our environment in relation to what is wanted, needed, or missing. So I would say, learning to look from failure, and here's the interesting thing, learning also the practices that support adaptability and resilience. So if we really want to respond to the conditions of the world that need more response, we have to be able to not only name what we see as needing a response, but have a confident, I'd like to respond, I'd like to use the gifts of my presence, or maybe the skills that I have in terms of my creativity, knowing that I will not always succeed. So how do I handle failure? How do I make a commitment to stay somewhat adaptive? And being adaptive means to learn from failure and try again. But to learn from failure and try again, so often in order to keep going forward, we really need to have the ongoing practices that help us learn. I don't know how many people know the very famous Ken Dyson from Dyson Vacuum Cleaner. I always like talking about him because if anyone has ever seen the Dyson Vacuum Cleaner, I think it only took him 2,678 failures to actually arrive at that success. How many times can we give ourselves more self-support to arrive at the confidence of knowing that comes from learning from failure with the practices that come to arriving at mastery? And I think the two things that I would say is part of really staying confident or knowing is to be able to scan our environment, but also scan ourselves. And also learning what is it that we need to commit to from our use of self that allows us to stay strong. I know what my strengths are. I'm going to ask each person who's on the call, do you know really what your strengths are? Do you know where you can afford more shining of your strengths? Because right there, that will allow yourself to be more confident. One of the things, I'm a somatic coach, and so what that means is very often people will be in a very stuck place. And I know 1,000% in the power of breathing. And it's always so small. And I always say to people, excuse me, may I invite you just to take a breath? And they look at me and they say, I'm breathing. I will say, I understand you are breathing, but you're breathing in a way that it doesn't have enough what I call self-support. And to everybody, I'm always amazed at the power of that small, what I call use of self-intervention around something that I've become somewhat masterful of, is inviting people to breathe. So I want to say to everybody, what are you confident in your skills that support others to feel more included, to make contact with themselves? I want to pause for a moment. I don't know if I've spoken too quickly, but I do believe that our question as coaches is, how do we use ourselves? How do we trust what we feel in our presence in responding to the environment about what is wanted, needed, or missing? And when we want to empower confidence, we need to be able to say to people, what are you doing that allows you to trust yourself more? What are the daily practices you can take that allow you to listen to yourself more? So many people actually don't listen to themselves. They put the authority outside of themselves on others, and in that very small way, betray their own wisdom. Again, whatever we do, we become. And so part of the way of really supporting people to find their own inner knowing, their own confidence, their own gap between I can and I can't, is the practices that we do on a daily basis that end up becoming the person we are, the presence we show, the use of self that we use or don't use. I'm going to turn my screen to off, if I can figure this out. It's interesting, so I don't know if that's generated any interest, but that's been the work that I have been doing that I find very provocative in people making more contact with themselves and ultimately making more contact with others.
Sana, you're muted.
Masterful. Thank you, Ram. Masterful mistakes are the way forward. Beautiful quote from Kinsko. I have not failed. I've just found 10,000 ways that don't work. That's Thomas Edison, right? Or the quote that Thomas is saying. Thank you, Dorothy. Yeah. An openness and a trust for failure and a trust for learning.
Absolutely.
Diane, Sylvia, would you like to add something to that?
I like the practices you were talking about. Ram was asking for something a little bit more concrete. And I believe that making time for self-reflection is critical for breathing in ourselves and our essence and what inspires us and what gives us joy and what we are called to do, what our next steps are. And all that comes from reflection. It doesn't happen from being distracted on the outside. I think it's a critical step.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And if I can build on what both of you said and to respond to Ram's request, something very interesting is the strength-based approach, which really builds on what Dorothy was saying. So, and all the fields of positive psychology, with so many tools, exercises and practices that you can really help the coachees to look at themselves from a different perspective, but from a perspective which is building the confidence. So that applies in particular, as Ram was saying, to women, because it's true that we need to acknowledge the challenges and reality, but applies to everybody. So again, starting to draw your focus and other people's focus on the positive. And it's a day in, day out effort, because it's always so easy to look at the glass full, half full or half empty in everyday life. But that's critical, not just for confidence, but also for inclusion and for, really finding joy in life, which is in the end is one of our key focus in key achievement moving focus in life. And so that as an approach, and also in practical terms, to really support men and women, but particularly women, to look at the network, because that's a critical ability that men have more natural and women have less. So as I was looking at some of the comments, it's so true that women often have the vocation, but also the burden to care for the youngs, the elderly, to care for people in general, for their families. And that's a very critical role too, to acknowledge. But that doesn't mean that you have to lose yourself necessarily in doing that. So it's really looking at also, your needs, not just other people's needs, respect your needs and other people's needs at the same time. So it's can something that you can learn. And if you have a network, supporting network, positive network, that's also so important. So that you're not on your own in maybe fighting difficult situation or challenging situation. And also to really have dreams, to again have role models, have a vision, not lose your passion, and looking above the difficulties that often life presents ourselves.
Sylvia, this is Dorothy. I love what you said. I wanted to, if I may just add to that. Simon, there's time. Can you nod? Yep. Okay. I think the thing I want to really just add is something that comes from a philosopher by the name of Michael Polanyi, many years ago, but quite a revolutionary thinker. And Polanyi said that people know more than they think that they know. And one practice to really invite people in all demographics, certainly women, certainly people who are LGBTQ, certainly people from countries that feel that they have not been part of the privilege. And that is, what do you know? What do you deeply believe in that needs to be heard? Because I think that's where the conversation really starts. That's where the revolutionary kind of evolutionary movements forward really happen. I know that when I graduated Case Western Reserve, and when I finished my degree, I said, I am going to be doing something with organizations and not therapy. We didn't even have the word coaching yet, because we needed something that was more relational. That was a knowing that I had that large system OD work didn't address. So I want to really say to people, what one question is, when we meet people, what do you know that needs to be heard in yourself or in your environment? And that yields so much rich response. Again, what are the practices? And maybe one of the things, for you, Ram, is your question is, what are the practices that people can have in their hip tool pocket that really helps them really be able to say to their clients, what can you do that helps you trust your knowing more? So often people just don't trust themselves, look for the authority outside themselves, and the self-oppression starts there. And it really is actually very painful, both to experience and both to see. So how can we help people trust themselves more? By asking the question, what do you know? And breathing into that with breath.
And as we become more aware, as we create more learning and understanding for ourselves, how can we meet client challenges that also evoke a conversation around humanity's gap? What are we doing in learning for ourselves? How do we challenge that, explore that, and evoke curiosity from our client base as to what's occurring for them right now? I appreciate we're masterful coaches on this call, but where does our responsibility stop as we begin to coach the conversation, as humanity reaches this place? So we're getting close to the half hour, 90 minutes that we're speaking, and I'm just wondering whether from each of you I can draw a little bit. What's the learning? What's the new insight that you'll be taking away from this conversation? Ram, please feel free to contribute to this too.
Please go ahead, and at the end, I'll just weigh in a bit. Yeah, thanks.
Okay. So when I was preparing for this panel, I came across Margaret Wheatley's website, and she has a course she's promoting right now called Warriors for the Human Spirit. She has a very long poem on it, but I would like in closing to read 5 lines of it. We need leaders who recognize the harm being done to people and planet through the dominant practices that control, ignore, abuse, and oppress the human spirit. We need leaders who put service over self, stand steadfast in crisis and failures, and who display unshakable faith that people can be generous, creative, and kind. And my question to the audience is, what does courage ask of you and of us right now in our individual situations or circumstances?
Thank you, Deanne. Dorothy or Sylvia?
Sylvia's on mute. Are you talking?
Yeah, I was trying.
Sorry.
So I'd like to link with what Dan said because in thinking about this panel, I really looked at how much courage in reality we need to have every day to really, be able to express ourselves, be with others, to, to try to make the world a better place for us and for others. And how fear is actually really blocking myself and others. And this question, what would I do or what would you do if you had no fear, is something that baby can be present every day in supporting us in overcoming our comfort zone, our barriers, our perceived blocks and real blocks. And again, a quote from Eleanor Roosevelt, which is, do one thing every day that scares you. And that's that's my suggestion, which goes again, and together we can build a better world.
I just want to follow that. That's so wonderful. I love that. It's on a Lululemon yoga bag. Do one thing every day that scares you. So I wanted to say this webinar scared me because to answer, I wanted, and I get scared often, but I also feel fear is a gift if I face it, and that is what is the way. And one of the things, fear comes to me very often, and I often say, is this a real fear or is this how I limit myself? And very often I will say to people, did you not have the answer, or did you stop yourself from even trying? Because some of our fears are fictitious, are imaginary. So it's a practice. Again, it's a practice. I want to just reference what Carla Gesist it tells us, and I think she kind of gave us a gift. Thank you, Carla. That she's taking a few things that stand out: confidence as a deep knowing, being internally validated, focusing on purpose. Something bigger helps us build confidence. And so beautifully said, because what's true is when something is bigger than me, as Deanne, you mentioned earlier, I never doubt myself. I know, I used to think that I was the only weird person who had these challenges. Now I think everyone has these challenges.
Mm-hmm.
It normalized it. So one of the things I say to people, don't feel you're alone. There's someone else in the world that has the same issue, has the same challenge. And right there they go, okay, how are they dealing with it? I think that that's part of, to remember we are absolutely part of the human condition. We have a cousin, we have a sister, we have a brother, we have someone carrying our issue. Maybe we can learn it 5 seconds faster so that we can tell them. We can be their Sherpa guide up to the mountain of confidence. I think actually a wonderful poem that comes from David White that I just love. And he says, so beautiful, he says, we shape ourselves to fit the world, and by the world we are shaped. Working with the invisible, we produce the miraculous. And I think the invisible is that moment of knowing that we don't know if we're going to be correct or not correct, but if we trust that moment that has a message, whether it's our vulnerability, our pain, our belief, our value, if we can voice it or share it or use it, that is what builds confidence. And we deserve the chance to try, and if it doesn't work, try again, get more support, and even from this moment together, look from this community who can also be a person whose wisdom I can take to remember. I want to just thank you for this time and turn it to you, Ram.
Just before you do, Ram, let me just say a little bit, and please pardon me because there's some noise in the background right now. Ram, you launched into a series of webinars a month long, and a series that's titled Coaching Across Boundaries. And I'm learning that some of those boundaries exist very much within ourselves.
What can we do? What can we take responsibility for to empower and free us to evoke the most powerful questions? And Magda, I think, launched one of the first sessions, Magda Mook, CEO of ICF, in asking what can be the greatest contribution that coaching can have and can offer to humanity. Just being true to ourselves, feeling that fear, I think. And I'm sensing a real shift in momentum. I'm feeling a real change from what now can be possible with the power of this type of conversation. If I leave you with an inquiry, if I leave you with a question, I'm asking you all, how might you integrate authentic being and belonging into your own coaching practice? What would it take for you to be the disruptor in being able to squish down that confidence gap in humanity rather than being disrupted by it and being sucked into those norms? I thank you. I'm incredibly humbled by your contributions and questions within the chat room. And my apologies for not getting to every single one of those. Thank you. Ram.
Yeah, thanks, Anna. And thanks all of you, Deanne, Sylvia, and Dorothy. One of the things that we've been doing this colloquium series the last 3 years, and now we are getting to a stage where it's for a whole month, which we want to keep this way. And one of the great things that I find in this is, as much as there is tremendous wisdom that is coming from the panels of speakers, that we are pretty careful in terms of selecting master coaches and people who have contributed tremendously. I find there is a tremendous wisdom that is coming from the audience, and that very often is probably greater, I apologize for saying that, than the wisdom of the speakers sometimes, because they build on that and they're able to reflect, as somebody said, are we self-reflective? Like, for example, today I'd like to refer to something that Vanessa had put in there, and it's about the solutions to our problems is our children. The other day in Netflix, in some movie or something, I saw this, or a documentary, this comment. What we need to work towards is for the unborn as yet to be born. And I truly believe in it. And what's happening, as I see around me, is that the young people are really at the forefront of making these changes. It's not the old fogies. Yes, we sit there and philosophize and say things, but there are many, like, for example, very, very simple thing. I was never involved in raising our children, to be honest. But I find in my own family, my son-in-law, these people are so hands-on, and they are devoting so much more time in terms of taking care of that, and not necessarily sort of flaunting the femininity or whatever it is. They're able to do that. And it's to me, it's unbelievable. It's truly great. And that's a moving forward rather than looking back at what was terrible in the past. Like Vanessa said, don't keep looking at the past, move forward. And I really would like to leave that with you. And one of the people over and above, the many people that were referred to in this conversation, certainly Carl Rogers, some of his basic fundamental beliefs, I think, are still very, very valid, even in this, addressing this confidence and so on. As coaches, if we can impart that spirit of unconditional positive regard and be congruent and empathetic. And far more importantly to me, in the whole legacy of Kurt Lewin and others, Edgar Schein and Peter Senge, today Otto Scharmer's whole philosophy of moving from the absencing to the presencing. I think it's in very, very simplistic manner, and not simplistic in a way. It's a beautifully put way, the theory, the way it works and how it is reaching out today. In fact, the current lab that he is conducting has more than 10,000 people participating all over the world, and it's free. And the inspiration for me comes from these kind of sources, people who are looking at others, at what we can do for them, and in what way, not about the money. What Sharma is doing, I think, is, what I am doing, what Coacharya is doing, what Magda and Ishmita, we are all doing, is a fraction of what someone like Sharma is doing. And someday we hope that we would be able to rise up to that level. But in the meantime, thank you all once again. There's a lot of, we have the festival of Deepavali in India, and it's more of, supposed to be a festival of lights. It's more like a festival of noise, firecrackers and everything going on all around me. Perhaps the audience can hear it too. I'll leave Nishmita to close the session. Thank you.
Thank you everyone for sharing all that you did. I'd like to take this opportunity to share one thought that kept running through my mind as the conversation was going. And that's the line, our greatest fear is not that we are inadequate, but that we are powerful beyond measure. And I just keep thinking to myself, you know, as you all were speaking about how if we have the confidence in ourselves, then we'll allow ourselves to be powerful and trust ourselves with that power. To the audience, I'd like to remind you that the conversation really does not end here. We'd love to hear a lot more about what you have to say. I'm posting the link to the forum on the chat. There it is. Please don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel. Again, the link is here. Sorry, just a second. And we hope to see you tomorrow for part 2 of Create Your Future with Ram. In case you missed the previous session, we've sent out a mailer with the recording. It's up on YouTube, so you can find it there. So please make sure that you catch up. There's a PDF that's available on the forum as well. Yeah, that's just it. Thank you.
Thank you, Nishmita. Just before we close, just would like to inform you, Seema, Sylvia, Diane, and Dorothy, that Nishmita would send you all the link to the forum, and we'll also send you the YouTube link, which you'd like to share to your network. And also in the forum, you can step in and see what conversation is going on and just contribute, because people would really be benefiting from whatever you're able to offer. And thank you once again very, very much, and hope to meet you soon rather than later. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.